I must apologize to the Legend of Zelda series, as I have repeatedly stated that I think most Zelda games don't really have stories worth paying attention to. You know, of course, there are a couple of standouts, your Link's Awakenings, your Majora's Masks, but for the most part, when I think of a Zelda story, I just think of a simple, straightforward tale just to facilitate an adventure game. But now I am starting to see that actually quite a number of Zelda games have pretty cool stories. Even Ocarina of Time, which I've already talked about in a video, I said didn't really have much there. I was wrong, and I'm gonna have to revisit Ocarina of Time one of these days to talk about it. But for now, I want to talk about Wind Waker because this is another game that I was really surprised to see how good this story is. However, before we begin talking about the story of Wind Waker, I want to talk a little bit about the story behind the game, specifically with its reveal and announcement, because for anyone who wasn't there at the time, Wind Waker, when it was first showed off, actually received a lot of criticism because people did not want this bright, colorful, cartoony Zelda. Everyone was really hopped up on that old GameCube tech demo where they showed like an up-res Ocarina of Time, Link and Ganon sword fighting each other, and everyone was like, oh man, I can't wait to play that game. And then Nintendo comes out with Wind Waker, and everyone's like, what the heck is this? This isn't what we wanted. We wanted dark, gritty, realistic Zelda. You know, especially at the time, early to mid-2000s, is when gaming was starting to go more in that direction, but Nintendo was defiantly not doing that. And people were not happy about it. Personally, I didn't care at all because I was like 7 and I didn't even know anything about anything when it came to video games at that time. I never saw that tech demo thing. I never even saw Wind Waker get announced. I just went to the game store one day and saw it on the shelf and I got it. So the whole big art style shift for this game didn't even really register to me as something worth noting. It was just the next Zelda game to me, so I was perfectly happy with the way this game looked. And I still am to this day. I think that everyone that was complaining back then for this baby Zelda was being stupid and you didn't know nothing about what you were talking about. I think the Toon Zelda style is great, and I'm very thankful that this game decided to go for something like that. But it's kind of funny because it seems like with Twilight Princess, after this game, they caved and was like, alright, you want your Dark Zelda? Fine, here you go. I mean, I'm sure that's not what actually happened, but that's just the impression I get from everything, and I think it's pretty funny. But the reason I want to talk about that is it will end up being fairly relevant to the story of Wind Waker in a certain way. But to now actually talk about the story of Wind Waker itself, one of the things immediately that kind of sets this game apart from other Zelda games is that it's the first, like, major game that doesn't take place in Hyrule. You know, there was Link's Awakening and the Oracle games before this, but those were just, like, handheld, so they're kind of smaller and, like, quote-unquote less important or whatever. But this is like the big next mainline console Zelda game, and it does not take place in Hyrule. It takes place in the Great Sea on this ocean, a very new setting for the series. And as far as plot is concerned, there is really not that much here. You have Link, and he lives on Outside Island with his sister and his grandma, and they live in peace. But then one day, his little sister Errol gets kidnapped by this giant bird, and these pirates show up, and Link gets involved to try to save his sister, and that leads him on this much bigger and grander adventure, where he discovers that he's the new hero of legend, and he has to save the world from Ganon. And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about when I say that a lot of Zelda stories don't really have much going on, because that is all of, like, the major important plot points in terms of what happens in this story. There are more details in there, but most of it is there just to facilitate game stuff, you know? Like, immediately you go to Forsaken Fortress, which is Ganon's hideout, try to save your sister, but that doesn't work out because you're not strong enough yet, so you gotta get the 3 MacGuffins so you can get the Master Sword, and then you go back, try to save your sister, but it's still not enough because the Master Sword has not been fully awakened yet, so you gotta get some sages and power it up. Gotta get the Triforce of Courage, and then you can defeat Ganon. And none of that's really that important for, like, the actual story, it's just things to fill out a video game. But while the actual plot of Wind Waker is fairly pedestrian, it's the message behind the game's story that I think is so incredibly strong. Let's talk about timeline stuff, and thankfully Wind Waker makes it pretty easy to figure out where this takes place, because it's got this whole opening section where it describes basically the events of Ocarina of Time. Wind Waker takes place way after the events of Ocarina of Time in the adult branch of the timeline. For those unfamiliar with the nightmare that is the Zelda timeline, at the end of Ocarina of Time, you kinda have a split. You have Link in the future as an adult, he defeats Ganon, and then Zelda sends him back to when he was a kid, before he ever opened the Door of Time. So you kinda get a split there. The adult version of events in Ocarina of Time, and Link disappearing from that world, and going on to the child version of events that leads into, like, Majora's Mask. And this game directly references the fact that Link is gone from this timeline because it describes that Ganon re-emerges eventually, and the people wait for the Hero of Time to come save them, but he never does. In the Hero of Time's absence, Ganon is able to take over, and this is where things get a little bit weird and we start to get into that, like, three-way timeline split. Because that's all fine to me, except for then A Link to the Past, because Ocarina of Time in many ways feels like it's supposed to be the prequel to A Link to the Past, because that game described the imprisoning war where 7 sages sealed Ganon in the Sacred Realm, which is what happens in Ocarina of Time. But then that doesn't line up with this, because then it would be, okay, the Hero of Time never shows up, Ganon takes over, but then the events of A Link to the Past would occur, and that Link would defeat Ganon and save the day. But here, that doesn't happen. Of course, nowadays we have the official Zelda timeline, which totally matters, I swear, and according to that, there's the whole three-way split after Ocarina of Time, including the hero gets defeated version of events. But ignoring that because it's stupid, and just looking at the games themselves that I've played so far, and interpreting it in my own way, I just see this as a version of the events of Zelda in which A Link to the Past never happens. So Ganon is released from his imprisonment from Ocarina of Time and goes on his rampage and takes over Hyrule, and then the people pray to the gods to solve the problem somehow, and that leads to them flooding the world, burying the Hyrule that Ganon took over, leaving people just to live on the mountaintops that would turn into the islands of the Great Sea. And that's kind of a spoiler, I'm jumping ahead here, but whatever, it's an old game. What's important is that this game is kind of the second sequel to Ocarina of Time alongside Majora's Mask. You know, many Zelda games are kind of standalone one-off things, and its relation to other games is not important or non-existent. This isn't a game like that. This is really heavily tied into Ocarina of Time, and I've always been aware of that lore-wise. There's a lot of stuff connecting this game directly to Ocarina of Time. But now, revisiting Wind Waker again, I see that thematically, this game, in a way, is also a follow-up to Ocarina of Time. And it's thanks to finally playing the second quest to this game that I started to figure out what the story is really about, because on the first quest, when you have the ancient god characters talking with each other, they speak in ancient Hylian, and the text is just nothing. You have no idea what they're saying, but on the second quest, you can see what they're saying, and it makes everything so much more clear. Although unfortunately it is going to mean that I'm not going to have the green tunic for any of the footage here. Sorry if that's going to bother your OCD when we're talking story stuff and it's the non-canon version of things, but this is the footage I got. So now, let's go through the plot of Wind Waker again with a bit more of a finely toothed comb and start to break things down a bit. As I said, our story begins on Outset Island, where Link lives with his sister and grandmother, and immediately I want to pause to talk about the music of Wind Waker, because the music in Zelda has always been excellent, of course, but I feel like this game is where they really take it to another level. Not just the quality of the music, but the usage of it. They start to really utilize music really well for helping to amplify the story. One of my favorite examples that I'd use is Aryll, Link's little sister, has her own theme that pops up sometimes in the soundtrack at certain moments relevant to her. But what's also nice about Errol's theme is that it's also integrated into the Outset Island theme. You know, Outset Island, that's Link's home, and part of what makes it home is that's where his sister is. So having her theme as part of the song, it's so perfect. But even that wasn't enough. They go an extra step with it. When you return to Outset Island later in the game, after Errol has been kidnapped, her theme is removed from the Outset Island soundtrack. Home doesn't feel quite right without your sister there. Brilliant. And the way they use music in the cutscenes of Wind Waker is so effective at adding so much more emotional weight to everything that's happening. Like, just listen to this scene. Beautiful. I would say that is like a perfect application of music for this kind of storytelling. You know, it makes me think a lot of Indiana Jones when you have those same themes that crop up multiple times throughout the story, where it makes the music really stand out in your mind. It's not just background music, it really is part of the adventure. But getting back on topic, the question is, why does that big bird come to kidnap Link's sister? Well, it's not actually after her. When it's initially coming to the island, it's actually already kidnapped the pirate Tetra, who, after being freed by her crew, Link goes to save her, and then the bird mistakes Link's sister for Tetra and kidnaps her instead. Thus, the pirates are kind of responsible for this whole mess, and they take Link along to pursue after it. And Tetra's a very fun character. She's the captain of this pirate crew, despite being such a young girl, and she's really sassy and confident, and I think she's really, really fun. And they follow the bird to the Forsaken Fortress, where Link tries to save his sister, but to no avail, it ends up capturing him, at which point we then get a tease that you can see super clearly in the HD version of the game that Ganon is back. And this is in fact the exact same Ganon from Ocarina of Time. This isn't a reincarnation or anything, it is the same guy. And after being tossed aside, Link is discovered by the King of Red Lions, this magical sentient boat who somehow knows a lot about all this stuff and says that he can help Link get his sister back, but it's gonna take a little bit of work. They have to get the 3 pearls of the goddesses in order to be able to do it, and so they head off on their little adventure, visiting these different locations. They go to Dragon Roost, a volcano island housing the Dragon Valu, and there they get Din's Pearl. They go to the Forest Haven, a forest island home to the Great Deku Tree, where they get Ferori's Pearl. And then they go to Great Fish Isle, where there was a whole huge section of the game cut out where they would have gotten Nehru's Pearl, but that didn't end up happening. And once Link has all 3 of these pearls and sets them up on these specific islands, then it brings up the Tower of the Gods, which Link then enters, and upon completing the challenge of the gods and proving himself worthy, he is brought down to the world below, the kingdom that was lost long ago. He is taken to Hyrule, where he acquires the Master Sword. And here I want to stop and start to talk about all of this, because something that's never really been apparent to me before is how planned out all this is by the various magical beings you encounter in this section of the game. Like I already said, the King of Red Lions knows all this stuff already somehow, and he already knows exactly how to acquire the Master Sword and where to go and what to do. And when you go to each of these locations, the King of Red Lions talks to Valu and the Great Deku Tree and Jaboon the fish, and they all know each other, and they already all know what they're talking about. And this is where playing the second quest really reveals some extra information here when they talk in Old Hylian to each other. When you first encounter the Great Deku Tree, for example, it mistakes Link for the Hero of Time, the Link from Ocarina of Time, and all three of these gods refer to the King of Red Lions as the King of Hyrule. And when you go to see Jabun, he asks the king whether or not he's found the Hero of Time, to which it responds, "No, I haven't found the hero, but this young boy shows much promise." And these gods discuss how it is exactly as they feared, the time they've been worrying about, the return of Ganon, and they have to do something about it, which is why they've recruited Link to help them. And seeing all this, you realize that this was all orchestrated and planned by these ancient beings. The fact that each of these beings holds one of the pearls that brings up the Tower of the Gods, and how they all had this idea in mind. You can imagine that long ago, perhaps when the world was initially flooded, these four concocted this plan to find the Hero of Time one day, defeat Ganon, and perhaps restore the world to how it used to be, unflooding it once he's no longer a threat. But of course, the Hero of Time is gone, and Ganon has now returned, so they gotta settle for this kid. And what I find interesting about this is that Link in this game is essentially a pawn of these ancient beings trying to achieve their goals, and he just gets caught up in it in trying to save his sister. And what's also interesting is that eventually you can go back onto Tetra's ship and now get into her quarters, where you see that she is in some way aware of all this stuff, apparently. And that all comes to a head when you return to the Forsaken Fortress, now with the Master Sword, and Tetra knows what it is when she sees it. She's like, "What's that? How did you get that sword?" Presumably, she also recognized the green tunic that I promise Link is supposed to be wearing in this footage, and that probably got her thinking things initially. But seeing Link with the Master Sword makes her realize how real this whole thing is. Going back to the question of before, why did Ganon's bird kidnap Errol? Because it was looking for a young girl with pointy ears. When you see Errol in the Forsaken Fortress, she's also imprisoned with other girls that have pointy ears. What's up with that? Why is Ganon after these girls with pointy ears? Because he's looking for something, as when Link and Tetra go to confront Ganon, his Triforce of Power reacts to the necklace that Tetra has that has this particular golden triangle shape to it. And he realizes that she is Princess Zelda. Oh my god! And after managing to escape from the Forsaken Fortress, the King of Red Lions takes Link and Tetra to Hyrule Castle once again, where he now reveals himself properly as the King of Hyrule, and also reveals to Tetra that she is the descendant of the old royal line, and that she is really Princess Zelda, the owner of the Triforce of Wisdom. That's why Ganon was looking for girls with pointy ears, because they would be Hylians, and one of these Hylian families out there on the ocean somewhere must be the descendants of the royal family, and would have the Triforce of Wisdom. And a really cool little detail I want to point out here is Errol was mistaken for Tetra, because she too, like Link, is Hylian and has those pointy ears, so she kind of looks like Zelda, right? Listen to her theme when I play it back to back with Zelda's Lullaby from Ocarina of Time. Sounds pretty similar, doesn't it? See, this is what I'm talking about. The music in Wind Waker is just on that next level compared to any of the previous Zelda games. They really utilize it really well. But here's something that's always rubbed me the wrong way with this whole Tetra is Princess Zelda stuff. Why is she Princess Zelda? Like, I get that it's the royal family and she's a descendant of Zelda, but her name is Tetra. Wouldn't she be Princess Tetra? And she is, like, technically Zelda or whatever. Maybe that's just a tradition in the Hylian royal family. But that's not her name. Also, weird thing, why does she get, like, way more pale when she gets transformed into Zelda? Like, is Zelda not allowed to have a tan? I don't know, it's weird. But now I realize that everyone telling Tetra, no, you're Princess Zelda, is kind of the point. Because one of the things I noticed in my most recent playthrough of Wind Waker that was kind of rubbing me the wrong way is how there wasn't a whole lot of genuinely new stuff in this game. When you really look at a lot of the elements of Wind Waker, most of them exist not on their own, but in their relation to things from Ocarina of Time. Like Dragon Roost, it's this big volcanic island. Obviously, it's Death Mountain. And while it might seem like the Rito, the bird people that live on Dragon Roost, are a new race in the world of Zelda, if you look at the symbols they have on their clothing, it's fairly similar to the Zora symbols from Ocarina of Time, and we eventually learn that the girl you meet on your first visit to Dragon Roost, Medli, who is Valu's attendant, it turns out she's much more than that. She is actually the descendant of the Earth Sage who would pray to the Master Sword and give it its power, and she needs to fulfill that same role now to help Link defeat Ganon. And we find out that her ancient descendant is Zora. Over the however long it's been between Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker, the Zoras must have evolved into the Rito, which I really don't understand how that makes any sense. How do the fish people turn into birds when the world floods? Shouldn't they, like, take over the world, basically? Whatever, it's not really important. What matters is that Medli thought she was one thing, but due to the past, due to her heritage, she's being told to be something else. She makes a comment before you leave to take her to the Earth Temple that she wants her friend Kamali to just see her as an attendant, because apparently that's not what she is. And when you go to the Forest Haven, this is clearly built off of the Kokiri Forest, because the Great Deku Tree here is the same Great Deku Tree from Ocarina of Time after you complete the Forest Temple, the one that sprouts brand new from the remains of the old one. After all this time, it's grown into its own proper Great Deku Tree. And you meet the Koroks, this race of little wood plant dudes, but it turns out that these two are a descendant of an ancient race from Ocarina of Time. As the Korok you get to know, Makar, on your first visit, it turns out that he is the descendant of the Wind Sage, who was a Kokiri back in the day. And just like Medli, Makar needs to play his instrument to pray to the Master Sword and restore its power. Both of these characters are essentially being forced to have this massive responsibility thrown on them due to no fault or choice of their own. Simply because of their heritage and where they come from, they are getting saddled with this duty. And a quick side note, again, this game's use of music is amazing. These two songs that the sages play are the two parts of the main theme of Wind Waker that play on the title screen. But it also makes me wonder, there was supposed to be 2 more dungeons in the game, the third location where you would have gotten Nehru's Pearl, which presumably would have meant there would have been a third character you would have met that was going to be a descendant of another Ocarina of Time race, that would be another sage, and they would have another part of the song. So there's like a whole bunch of stuff missing here, like maybe the main theme has a missing bit that was never implemented. What is that other race that was going to be in the game, and what were they going to be the descendants of? Who knows? There are Gorons in the game, but they're just Gorons, and they have a very minor role in things. I guess while we're getting minor little things out of the way, we can talk about the Wind Waker a little bit, because it's shocking that the namesake of this game is such a minor element of it. The King of Red Lions just gives it to you basically out of nowhere at one point, and it's not really that important in the overall scheme of things in the way the Ocarina of Time is in that game, for example. And I feel like there is something here that's missing, because the Wind Waker is like a baton for conducting, and one of the things I like about Zelda, especially around this time, is like music was magical. Like a lot of Zelda games have their key instrument that's almost like the way you cast magic spells, and I don't know, there's just something about that I really like in the series. But for this one, you don't have an instrument, but you get these other characters that they play instruments and you conduct them, and it makes it feel like maybe in an earlier version of the game, when there was going to be that third proper dungeon, you'd have 3 sages, and maybe at one point you were going to conduct all 3 of them together, and they would play some sort of big song. That would have been really cool, but whatever. Actually, another quick note I want to make about things being related to the past. The Forsaken Fortress, when you first go there, Tetra comments that it was once housed to just a simple band of pirates until Ganon came and take over. And we don't know anything about that band of pirates, but if you pay attention to some of the imagery we see in the Forsaken Fortress, it kind of resembles the Sheikah icon, which makes me wonder if maybe those pirates she mentions were supposed to be the descendants of the Sheikah. That would have been a cool thing to see in the game. Another kind of small thing that I want to talk about a little bit is the etymology of the various creatures in the world of Zelda, because something I like about these games, they actually put in work to have, like, naming schemes for things that feel realistic and logical. You gotta be a real turbo nerd to care about this stuff, but like, Fos, right, as a suffix, number of enemies have that, Stalfos, Lizalfos, etc., and when you look at all the creatures that have that name, they're all like humanoids, right? Like a Stalfos is a humanoid skeleton, and a Lizalfos is a humanoid lizard. So Fos, in like the Hylian language in Hyrule in the world of Zelda, means like something that is humanoid. Meanwhile, Stal, as a prefix, means something that is skeletal, because you have Stalfos, Stal children, so Stal itself means something. Or the term Deku throughout the Zelda series, what does that mean? When you look at all the different creatures that are called Deku, it seems like quite a wide array of things. The Great Deku Tree, Deku Babas, Deku Scrubs. To me, Deku seems to be a term that refers to sentient plants, plants that are actually conscious and aware and act like animals. And I'm bringing up this stuff and why I think it's cool now, because in Wind Waker, they introduce a new term, Boko. If you go to the Forest Haven, then you have Boko Babas, which are clearly related to Deku Babas. And it also introduces Bokoblins, which are Ganon's, like, pig minions, similar to Moblins, which have been around for a long time. But now we have these Bokoblins. So what does this Boko terminology mean? Because what connects these two things together? Not really anything, but I think that Boko refers to something that is new. Like Boko Babas are the new form of Deku Baba that have evolved over time, and Bokoblins, or Bokoblins, I don't know how it's supposed to be pronounced, are a new type of Moblin that have shown up in that time period. And again, I just think all this stuff is cool. The fact that someone somewhere on the Zelda team was thinking about this stuff and putting effort into it, I appreciate that. One last tiny little detail that I want to shine a spotlight on is the pearls. You put them in those statues, and they obviously represent Din, Ferori, and Nehru, the goddesses of Zelda. But if you look at the statues themselves, they clearly resemble the sages from the Oracle games, which is cool. Makes me wonder if those oracles are reincarnations of those goddesses as mortals in some way, or at the very least the goddesses would have looked like those characters somehow. I don't know, it's interesting. But anyway, everything happening in the story of Wind Waker is in relation to Ocarina of Time, the Hero of Time, everything that happened long ago, and the machinations of these beings from the old world. The King of Hyrule, Ganon, these gods. They have their plans, like Ganon wants to unflood the world so he can rule over Hyrule again. Meanwhile, the gods want to stop Ganon, so perhaps they too could unflood the world and allow it to return to how it used to be. And it's almost as if they don't care about the current state of the world, what it's like now, and the people living today. This world is a mistake. It only exists because of our failure to stop Ganon. We need to right that, and all of the people live now need to do their part to help us achieve our goal of fixing everything and getting back the world to how it was in our time. They say this kind of thing very explicitly sometimes, where like the King of Hyrule is talking to Tetra and saying that you must abide by the laws of the past. I have to teach you your fate, the very reason that you live. As if Tetra's life itself is not important. The only thing that's important about it is how she can serve this greater purpose that was decided before she was even born without her consent. Same goes for Medley and Makar, and basically everything that all these characters are going through. Even Link, while he gets wrapped up into these events by his own choice, that's only because he's the backup plan because these ancient beings couldn't find the Hero of Time. And all of this comes together at the very end of the game. Tetra has the Triforce of Wisdom. I'm going to call her by her actual name and give her the respect that these ancient beings won't. Ganon, of course, has the Triforce of Power, and at the end of the game, Link acquires the Triforce of Courage, and so these three pieces are reunited, and Ganon wants to use the Triforce to grant his wish of restoring Hyrule. But the King of Hyrule gets his hands on the Triforce first, and he instead makes a different wish. He wishes for Hyrule to be washed away permanently, no longer trapped in this stasis state of maybe one day it could be restored. No, it's time to let it go and move on. And it's after Link and Tetra defeat Ganon that the King of Hyrule says as much, that he has been living filled with regrets. Not a day has gone by where he has not lamented for the lost kingdom. But now, after everything that's happened, after seeing Link and Tetra and all these other characters living their lives in the modern world on the Great Sea, the King of Hyrule realizes that the kingdom doesn't need to be restored, and instead, the people of today can find their own new land to call their own. And we end the game not with our hero returning home to his peaceful life, but embarking on a new adventure ready to leave the past behind and look toward tomorrow. That is what makes Wind Waker's story so great. It is about learning to let the past be the past, to say that things don't have to go back to the way they were. While what used to be may have been really good, it's okay for that to go away and for something new to take its place. And you can interpret these themes in many different ways. Like, this could all represent someone who had a really bad event occur in their life, and things from there took a turn for the worse. And they really want for one day things to go back to how they used to be. But they can't go back to how they used to be, and the person coming to terms with that and being willing and ready to acknowledge that the wonderful times of the past are behind you and you can only move forward and make the most of what you have now. You could also interpret it as a parent that has failed in their own life in some way and is trying to live vicariously through their children. You will achieve the things that I did not in my life. It is your responsibility to pick up where I left off, and you have no say in the matter. Or it could just be about the world changing and one generation screwing things up for the next and leaving them with a world that's a mess. But the new generation still has to find a way to live on anyway. This game has such a wonderful message behind it. I am really impressed with how good this is. You know, and maybe it could have been a little bit better done with how it gets you invested in these ideas and really makes you feel and care about the characters. The King of Hyrule especially, his turn at the end feels like it's not 100% justified. There's no real moments that lead into that change in him, you know? But I think it's mostly fine. It works well enough to get these wide ideas across, and I think it's just awesome. And it's really starting to change my tune about story in Zelda games. I'm now very excited to revisit Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, and who knows, maybe even some of the handheld games, to see if they also have stories with a lot of meat to them that I can dissect as well. Ooh, I'm excited. But first, as I said before, I gotta go back and give Ocarina of Time its due diligence. So while I'm at it, might as well do Majora's Mask 2, why not? So surprised to say it, but I got a lot more Zelda story videos coming in the future, and I hope you're looking forward to them.